Out of the blue, God shows up in the world. Out of the blue, God shows up in our lives. And out of the blue, God says, check out what I want to do. Do you want to be part of it? God's plans may take a while to brew, to rise, to grow roots deep enough to burst into flower. But no matter how long God's plans take in the background, when we humans realize what's going on, they often feel sudden, like it's a surprise that something has happened. We might not even realize all the background work that has been going on. It just feels like, At home, I don't hear, wait a minute, when one of my kids needs more time to work on something. Instead, the phrase I get is, let him cook. And it is slang I love because it reminds me that I can't see what's happening. But it reminds me also that something is happening, and I need to give it time. I don't know if the writers of this series have kids living at home, but I definitely smiled and heard it in a children's voice when I read that our theme for today is days to prepare, minutes to cook. It's like marinating tofu forever because it smells so good and then stir-frying it in hot oil. Aging a steak and then throwing it on a perfectly hot grill. The wood fire tended for a week before the pizza can cook in a few minutes. Right? It's easy to lose track of all the work that went on in the background in order to make something happen. And in both our readings today, we get to see the flashpoint as well as the preparation of events. We get to glimpse how God shows up in ways that say, hey, God has always been with us and is always at work. When God says, let it cook, it is easy to say, but I would like it now. But we're called to trust that something is going on, even when we can't see it. For those of us who grew up Christian, there were often familiar passages that we hear, and today we have two of them. They are fall or winter passages. The promises of Isaiah, the hope of Mary, the birth of Jesus. And I think for those of us who didn't grow up hearing them, we wonder, right, what on earth is going on? What do peaceful animals have to do with Jesus? What does labor that we're not alienated from have to do with Jesus, right? What is Mary going on about, and how can she be so bold as to say she's going to bring down rulers and evil? It's in these questions that I think we find our entry into God's work that's been going on for a very long time. So first, I want to remind us that as Christians, we often read the prophets as pointing toward Jesus, our Messiah. And that's one way of reading these scriptures, but it's not the only way. We don't want to insist it's the only way or the right way because we don't want to ignore the fact that our Jewish siblings read them entirely differently. And so as we talk today about this passage from Isaiah, I want to be really clear that we're doing it in a Christian context. And so it's good for us to say, oh, that's about Jesus, but it's not the only way. We want to celebrate that God speaks to us through the same words and gets us to different points, and that that's okay. That's where we are today, looking at the Jesus version. And so we keep in mind that both the author of Isaiah and Mary were Jewish, right? We look at these songs and these hopes and these promises as evidence that God's work has been going on long before we realized it. In Isaiah, we see this moment of big change, right? All of Earth's problems are just done. They vanish. And we get to dream about what that looks like. In the reading from Luke, we hear Mary's bold proclamation that this unexpected child will change the world. Mary borrows and she mirrors and expands on the words of her Jewish foremother Hannah. Hannah thought that she was barren until she got miraculously pregnant with the child who would grow up to be the prophet Samuel. Right? In all of this, God blesses and raises up the unlikely. Mary exalts even me as she begins her song. God's mercy, Mary declares, is for all those who fear him, from generation to generation, right? There's a fluidity here. Mercy is not locked in the past. And mercy is not only for the future, it's for everyone who loves and follows the Lord. And Mary sings that God's strength is not in buildings or traditions, it is in the people God has shepherded, in the lives that God has changed. When God brings down the powerful and lifts up the lowly, that is God's strength showing up. We may be surprised, but God is not. When God fills the hungry with good things and sends the rich away empty, God's strength says, hey, I've been working on this for a minute. We may be surprised, but God is not. Right? God does not forget. God comes to the aid of God's children in need because of this promise. God says, I am with you. And then God keeps that promise. God promised our ancestors that God would not forget us and that God would create for us and with us a community, a family, more numerous than the stars in the sky or the grains of sand on the beach. And God does not fail to deliver. But that kind of promise takes a while to build. And so when we look around and go, whoa, I see that. God says, yeah, we've been working on that for quite a while. It is the promise not only of us recognizing what happens, but this promise that we see in Isaiah, right? No one will labor in vain. We're not going to toil and then someone else take what we have created or worked so hard for. We will eat what we produce. No one will build and then not have time to live there. No one will build and have it taken away. And everyone will get to have a life full of abundance. This life that we think is just the way things are, the natural order of chasing and killing and death so that others can live, that thing is going to go away. Long in the making, God says, is a world where no one will harm and no one will be harmed. And so God tells us to be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. Not what I did long ago at the beginning, but what I am continually doing. Not just now, but also in the future. We get this vision of deep peace that holds all creation. All creation's problems disappear. We are all good to eat straw and hay instead of each other. What God has been doing all along is creating. And we see the fruits of that creation explode in joy and wonder. Right? And we know that that's been going on before we get to see what happens. And it's in that joy of being like, oh, that we get to recognize how God is at work in this seems sudden but long time coming change. When we talk about things that have been simmering for a long time and finally happen, the surprise of, oh, we're not talking about car accidents or having a stroke or flooding and typhoons. Those are sudden, but they are not causes for rejoicing. We may be able to say, oh, that's been a long time in the works. But that is not where God is like, yeah, I've been working on that. There is no rejoicing there. And when we look at the creating God is doing, it is the long, slow creation that causes rejoicing and joy that says, oh, God has always been at work and we get to be part of that. But also we get to name what that looks like because our brains, God love them, are not always good at distinguishing between danger and change, right? Sometimes we're like, oh, that's different. And sometimes we're like, that's different. And they feel different. We can't always tell when, though, it's different and danger. Sometimes the opposite is true, too. Sometimes we think the big big change is danger, and it's world-ending, and it's the destruction of everything we've ever known anything good. And we feel our shoulders go up and our throats get tight and our muscles tense. We are ready to fight or flight or freeze, but clearly this is not what God wants. And when we take a deep breath, and we feel the hands of God's on our shoulders, and we remember that God's long-term work is love, we start to go, oh, I am invited to be part of this change. I am only seeing part of what God is doing. And the change that feels like danger is just the movement toward the sudden flowering that we can't quite yet see. And so we dig in and we trust. We find a merry song, or we paint a picture of lions and lambs, or we imagine what it would be like to live in a world where 100 years is a short life, and we get the time and the resources and the energy to do all that we dream we could do. It's not just personal. It is never about just one of us. It is always about community as well. Right? We see some of this now as here. We've got teams working on discerning God's dreams for us. Teams working on what it will take to make that happen. We're not the only ones experiencing this. I know I say this at least once a month, but every mainline Protestant church in America is dealing with this. Right? We came up, we built our buildings, we grew our systems at a time when if you weren't Christian, you couldn't be a good person. And now that has changed, and we are left going, okay, what now? But it's not just the church, it's the world, right? Beyond us, beyond Christianity. It's always long-term planning and work and change, and then we go, oh, wait, that's different. And then we have to change, and we have to shift, and then we make more plans and try it again, do more work, and this suddenly goes, oh, now this thing is different, right? Think about the Montgomery bus boycotts. This was not merely a tired seamstress who was just like, nope, I'm done. Right? These were planned carefully with groups of people who were thinking long term. They had great attention to timing and detail for the greatest impact. But what we remember is that moment of nope that seemed sudden. Right? And similarly, right, the beginning of 2025, we had this seemingly sudden end of like diversity and equity and inclusion programs, or the recent government shutdown, the removal of trans people from our military and not giving them the health care they deserve as veterans, these shifts in who our United States allies are, right? All of this can seem really sudden, right? What just happened? It's been 10 months, but that too was in the works, right? Change, long planned, just seems sudden when it happens. And it can feel, I think it often feels, like it's a reflection of culture wars, right? Liberal or conservative, secular or religious. But that's not how God works, and we know it. At the root of so much of our fear and our rage and our cruelty and our anger, at the root of our sin, is that binary of life and death. And that's where God comes in. Time after time, again and again, and surprises us. God has an eternity of work and plan and love and hope, and God is making a way where there is no way. Right? Freedom in the midst of slavery. Food in the midst of famine. Medicine in the midst of dehumanization, flowers in the middle of the desert. That one stubborn tree stump that got cut down a decade ago and just keeps throwing off new shoots. And we're not really sure how. Neatly folded burial clothes in an empty tomb. The work of God is the work of life in the face of death, and we know that is God's work. And we know it is a long sort of work. And sometimes we'd like it to be more, right? That long-term work doesn't prevent us from experiencing death or evil as we live. But it'd be nice if it did, right? Somehow, though, I really believe that somehow in the deepest parts of ourselves, and even as we grieve, death does not have the last word. Because the promise of new life remains, because we believe that even death is part of that long work. And the promise of new life will flash and we'll go, oh, I knew that was going to happen, but that is still somehow a surprise. It's not just for us, not only in the sense of like beyond this room, beyond individuals, it also works for systems, right? We believe when we say, thy kingdom come, it means the world will change. We believe that God cares for all creation in ways that will change for the good for everyone. As author Justin Kashuk says, we know God can sweep away the powers of the world in a minute. God has promised to do this again and again, from age to age, from moment to moment, in our own lives, and every time the power of death or the systemic forces of this world, every time those things reassert their dominance, we get to discover anew the ease with which God sweeps it away. The systems that seem ineradicable, and we get to watch how clearly God's intention has been telegraphed for ages. Right? God's got a plan. And sometimes as we are in it, it is hard to be like, really? God's got a plan? Could you clue me in, Lord? That would be good. I would like to know what I'm working for and if it's working and what we should change. And God's like, no, I have the plan. You just have to trust and keep working with me. And together we cooperate, even when we don't know the whole plan. And that way, even the best prepared of us still get to be surprised when God shows up and is like, look at what we've been working toward. And that surprise, too, is a gift. Thanks be to God. Amen. Amen.